Okay then, well it's 6:30 and I'd like to welcome you to the Buyer Solutions First Home Buyers online webinar and welcome Janet Spencer, the main principal director and chief cook and bottle washer for Buyer Solutions. Has got a very long and distinguished career in the real estate industry and has bought an awful lot of properties, but also she's been recognised by the real estate industry as the Buyer's Agent of the Year in many years, most recently in 2020. She's also going to be representing Victoria in the REIA, Real Estate Industry of Australia Awards, in Darwin, I think it is, Janet, isn't it?
Darwin in June this year. It's a bit later than normal.
Yes, so that's going to be happening. So she's bought a lot of properties, but Buyer Solutions also has a property management division. So quite often they're buying properties on behalf of investors as well. So a great depth of knowledge, and definitely going to be encouraging you to reach out to Janet after this seminar if you've got additional questions. She offers a 30-minute consultation free of charge, but I've opened up the website for Buyer Solutions here on the screen, and this is the First Home Buyers page. So I'll just pop that link in the chat if you would like to read that page in a bit more detail. It goes through some of the information, and throughout this session I'll be popping things in the chat. I'll be putting in links, encouraging you to follow Buyer Solutions on social media, and of course asking your questions as well. We really love to hear your questions, both in the chat and in person. If you would like to pop in the chat if you're interested in attending this just because you're looking for a first home, or you're looking for a property purchase, or if you want to mention suburbs that you're particularly interested in, any of those sorts of little tips that you can pop in the chat will give us some things to talk about. We do have some high level information that we're going to be starting off with. And so Janet, I'd love you to fill us in on the Melbourne property market 2021. I believe you've got some statistics that you've picked up today that you can share with us.
Yes, so as you know, I'm an active member of the Real Estate Institute of Victoria, and we get our data from a lot of different sources, but it was interesting. I might just pop my glasses on, people, that in the March quarter of 2021, house prices have shown a quarterly change upward of 8.8% across the whole market in metropolitan Melbourne, and units and apartments, which they all lump in together, 1, 2 and 3 bedroom units. So it's not as helpful data, but they've gone up 4.8% in the quarter. So it's pretty scary. Some suburbs are driven by lifestyle choices. For example, Mentone has gone up 28.1% in the March quarter. I'm not going to bore you with going through all the various suburbs, but if you have got a specific suburb at the end and you'd like to ask me a question on what that area is doing at the current point in time, please feel free to ask me. The market is therefore quite challenging for buyers. There's a lot of people out after COVID looking for homes and investment properties. And another thing that we're seeing at Buyer Solutions is quite a bit of money's coming back into the country from Australians based overseas. I personally have just done a purchase for some clients based in Geneva, and also clients based in Philadelphia who at the appropriate time will want to come home to Melbourne and live.
Yeah, I can see that becoming a big trend. And even on the news that I was watching today, there was reports of people being stuck in India and really desperately wanting to come back to Australia because of how bad things are there at the moment. So, all right, I thought what we'll start, we've got a lot of questions that were listed on the event details for this event, but I think it would be really helpful, Janet, if you just give us a bit of a run through of the typical first home buyer process. What do people do if they're thinking about purchasing their very first property?
Okay, well, really the first thing you need to do is save up your deposit. And we were talking earlier to a young couple who've saved really hard during 2020. And then the next thing to do is go and see someone who will provide you with the additional money to make the purchase. So that could be a broker or it could be your banker. indeed you might want to speak to both and compare the services and make sure you've got the best loan in place. I urge you to speak to experienced professionals at all times throughout the purchasing process. At that point, you need to define where you want to buy and what you want to buy. And that can be pretty intimidating. It really involves pounding the pavement, getting out there, looking at real property examples and also the internet quite obsessively, possibly. I always look at multiple websites, not just realestate.com.au, because you just don't know where you might find the perfect property. So don't be lazy, be high energy, look around, shop around, talk to people, and you'll start to become more confident as you go through the process.
And which websites do you recommend apart from realestate.com.au? Obviously domain.com.au, but...
Yeah, and view.com.au. And there's a few more like Homely and even sometimes on Gumtree. Sounds ridiculous, but people do advertise property there. So that can be helpful. As I said, don't be loyal to one website.
No, and interestingly, I've even seen properties advertised on Facebook Marketplace, particularly holiday properties. So that's another interesting place. So if we've now got an idea of sort of the types of properties we might be interested in purchasing as a first-time buyer, would you recommend a house, a unit, an apartment, a townhouse, a villa? One of the things that annoys me tremendously on realestate.com.au is you say you're looking for a house and it brings up apartments, but yeah, is there any particular thing that you recommend in terms of what to buy?
My uncle was a valuer, a very well-respected valuer in Victoria, and he told me that God's not making any more land. So, that sounds like a joke, but, it's going to get back to budget, Sue, because if you can't afford, there's another saying in real estate, location, location, location. So I would argue you need to buy the highest quality property in your budget in the best location you can get into. And key factors will be things like public transport, access to schools, parks, getting to and from work, how long is your commute going to be? I ask all my home buyers to sit down and write a list of must-haves and would-likes. And then if you're buying with a partner or, another purchaser, maybe cross-reference your lists. I find it a really useful exercise to kick off the process. So 1, save your deposit. 2, get your loan approval in place. 3, do your research.
And would you say, for instance, we're talking about apartments, that's the only thing within someone's budget. Would you recommend off the plan, new, established, older, any particular things in terms of apartments?
I don't buy a lot off the plan. And if I do buy off the plan on behalf of clients, it's normally more like a townhouse or a very small apartment development. That's how you maximise your land content and also minimise your exposure to owners corporation and all the pros and cons that come with engaging with an owners corporation. For buyers out there who don't know what that is, if the property is strata or plan of subdivision, there are multiple properties in the subdivision. There will be an owners corporation that generally is active or inactive, running day-to-day things like insurances, public lighting, garden maintenance, all that sort of thing. So very important to be aware of that.
And just a reminder to people that we are recording this seminar. So if you know somebody else who'd be interested in watching it later, we'll be sending out the recording link. So you're welcome to share that. Now, you already mentioned that people need to get their finance approved, but there have been a lot of government incentives around to try and encourage people to make that bold leap and purchase property. So have you got any recommendations on the best government incentives for first-time buyers?
Well, a really big one at the moment, not just for first home buyers, is the 25% reduction in stamp duty that is going to run out on the 30th of June. That was brought in due to COVID. There's also the 5% deposit scheme. I do know people who are availing themselves of that, but the purchase limit is 600,000, so you can't pay a penny over 600 if you're on that 5% deposit scheme. And also the stamp duty concessions that apply for first home buyers, up to 600,000 in the state of Victoria, you're paying no stamp duty, and then it's on a descending scale between 6 and 750. So the closer you are to 750, the more likely you're paying almost entirely full stamp duty, which is about 5.5% in Victoria. So it's a big chunk of change, and it's one of the reasons all property buyers need to calm down and get it right. Yeah, it's not a space to make mistakes.
And do you think that because there's not a lot of properties available for purchase at the moment, that's pushing the prices up beyond the 600 mark for a lot of relevant properties?
Yes, without question. It's a really difficult to stay under 600 and buy a quality property. And the buyers are having to make compromises.
Yes, I can imagine. And is there anything that the government could do to make it easier for first home buyers without the property market responding and trying to get more out of that first home buyer?
It's not a space I can really advise the government on. It's just too complex. Every time they tweak the system a little bit, there's unintended consequences. Like if you were talking to people last year, this year the market was going to fall 30%. Quite the opposite in some suburbs, particularly high lifestyle suburbs like Chelsea, Mentone, Bayside, even right down to Blairgowrie. The market's more likely gone up 30% in a rebound to COVID. So, yeah, it's very hard to predict or advise the government.
Yeah, and also regional Victoria has had a significant increase in prices as well, I believe.
Yeah, well, people can work from home, and they've had to work from home last year, and they're quite comfortable with doing that, and it's affecting their decisions on where they want to live.
And would you recommend that first home buyers consider moving to a regional area?
I think having the income to pay the mortgage after you've bought the property is what you should have front of mind. So if you can work regionally and have secure work or work from home, it could be a good way to buy a better property for less.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, there's no point buying cheaper if you can't make the repayments. It's definitely going to put you in a difficult position. And so, if you have a choice between buying something larger further out and something smaller close to where you're currently living, what would you generally recommend? And bearing in mind, this is all general advice tonight, not related to a specific example, but what would you recommend to a first home buyer?
Well, I think that's intensely personal, and I probably have two different types of first home buyers there. It's a real room splitter, Sue. So if the buyer wants it to be their forever home and for them to be able to grow into it, have children, etc., then you might lean towards the house. However, if they're wanting strong capital growth and lifestyle, and it's entirely appropriate to buy an apartment or unit closer into all the amenity of Melbourne. So it's, again, as I said, it's a room splitter, and it's a conversation I have with every couple client in terms of picking those suburbs that we're going to target.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, more related to that, can you give us an indication of the capital growth differences between, that inner city type of location versus further out? Are they similar overall?
I think that inner city at the moment is a sort of poor example if we're talking Melbourne CBD, because it's been hit so hard by international students not being here, and active and migration market is obviously non-existent. So does that open some new opportunities for buyers to pick up real Melbourne CBD property a bit cheaper? Yes, probably, definitely. But then we're looking at all sorts of issues like flammable cladding, it just going back to the owners corporation and how much are the owners corporation fees, I mean, there's next level due diligence to do before you buy an apartment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of things that now that the fire has well and truly passed that was in the city, and that cladding issue has died down out of the media, unless you were around when it happened, you could, very
Yeah,
easily
that's
buy
right.
the wrong sort of property. And I've heard of residents having to pay up to $80,000 to get the building, there's their share to get the cladding replaced. Have you got any indication on what sort of fees that people have been having to pay for those sorts of renovations?
No, I did go to the Cladding Safe Victoria presentation in 2019. And I think one of the big challenges was for the owners' corporation managers to get 80% or 100% vote to make the changes, let alone the price. Some of the developers are quite willing to pay the cost and do the work, but you've got to have the voting majority to go forward with the work. So, yeah, it's a can of worms. I'm just not going there for my clients.
No, I understood. And basically, if there's a cladding issue, don't buy there, is I guess what you're saying. Now, you've also had a view that within suburbs, there are pockets that are more interesting than other pockets. Can you talk to that?
Yes, I think you can't generalise across the suburb. There's the better streets, the ones that are closer to the schools. In my own buying experience with my home, I probably made a mistake and bought close to the kindergarten instead of close to the primary school, because my kids are only there for a year. And then I had to do the drive to school for 10 years. So think long term when you're buying real estate.
Yeah, absolutely. And particularly if you love the house, there's a lot of factors involved. Now, a lot of people in the first home market rely on advice from family and friends. So can you give us a bit of a clue as to the best and worst of family and friends advice that you've heard from people over the years?
Yes, I think one of the worst pieces of advice is to not get a building inspection done. And then obviously we always advise our clients to get a building, possibly a pest inspection done as part of your due diligence, because you just don't know what trouble you're going to have down the track and what expenses are involved unless you do the research. I think lots of buyers at the moment are thinking they need to cut corners, so not get solicitors to do contract reviews and things like that, because if they miss out, it's a redundant expense. So, but I would argue the risk is too high not to engage good, professional, high quality, independent advice, which may include a buyer's agent. And do your due diligence on the people you're going to employ. I'm proudly a member of, as I said, the Real Estate Institute of Victoria, and also REBA, REBAA, which is the Real Estate Buyers Agent Association of Australia. And you've got to have certain runs on the board and be accredited to be able to be a member of that organisation. So it's well worth doing your research.
Yeah, I know that there's a lot of online seminars for buying property and getting into investments and all sorts of things. And I've noticed they pop up all the time on my Facebook feed, possibly because I'm interested in real estate.
Yes.
And I'm very concerned at the qualifications and backgrounds of some of those advisors.
Yes.
So, yeah, I think that's really good advice. Now, there's a comment about timing the market or just buying regardless of the time. Do you have any particular recommendations on should people buy right now? Should they wait a little bit? What's your suggestions there?
There's only been 1 or 2 periods in my whole career where I've advised people to sit out of the market and wait. And it's a very hard call to make as their professional advisor. I think we might have to reconvene that question in 6 months' time, because we're in a period of time where we're rebounding to the very severe lockdowns that occurred in Melbourne last year. And I think that the fear of missing out is, will we get locked down again? Am I going to be stuck here? So it's motivating people to act, and quite aggressively at the moment. So I think that's where the 30-minute consultation comes in, Sue. There's no cost involved, and on a case-by-case basis, we can talk that through. At least then you can make an intelligent decision about when you want to buy, what you want to buy, and when you want to kick the plan off with a bit of independent advice.
Yeah, perfect suggestion. Okay, so there's lots of ways that you can buy a property: off the plan, off market, private sale, expression of interest if you're in the sort of higher budget, tender, auction. Do you have any tips for any of those particular modalities for first home buyers?
Well, firstly, I'm acknowledging, we were talking to a young couple earlier just before we started the session, how incredibly intimidating it is. It is. It's a full-time study for me, and I've been doing this over 25 years to keep on top of the game. Selling agents, not your friend, probably the worst source of information. I'm not being disrespectful to the selling agent, but their job is to get the highest price out of you. And just recognise that and go into the situation with the eyes wide open. There's a lot of complaints from our clients at the moment that the statement of information that you have to be given in Victoria, it's a piece of paper with either no comparable sales or 3 comparable sales on it, that properties are selling well in excess of the range that's quoted. And that's just a reality because we're on a rising market for good property in hot demand.
Yeah. So apart from real estate agents, are there any other people in the property purchasing space that have a potential conflict of interest and could advise you slightly incorrectly?
Yes. Developers are one example. If you're buying through a developer, they're sort of like the selling agent, trying to get the highest price, or indeed marketing only at a fixed price on off the plan. So yeah, maybe get a second sounding board. And again, put my hand up.
Yeah,
get a good buyer's agent. A lot of first home buyers don't know that we offer a partial service, which is they go and find the house they want to buy, and then for a reduced fee bring in Buyer Solutions to do the evaluation and negotiation with the selling agent or bid at auction. So it's sort of a partial service that really sits well with locally based home buyers, first and second home buyers. So
good. It sounds like it'd be good to get the 30 minutes, go out and do a bit of research and come back to you. What about house and land packages? They're sort of often touted with extra government incentives for first home buyers. Do you recommend them as a general rule?
I've never bought a house and land package. That's not to say that I wouldn't, but there are suburbs in Melbourne that have almost shown zero capital growth over the past 5 to 8 years. So they're very appealing to buyers because of the incentives, extra financial incentives, and also they're shiny, bright and new, you know. But sometimes it's more beneficial to roll your sleeves up and do a bit of renovating and add value that way to an existing older property. So I often encourage my first home buyers and buyers in general to keep back a bit of budget so you can do some work.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we do have some questions in the chat, so I will come to those before I go back over some of the costly mistakes that we had listed on the event. I mean, you can just read those again if you would like to read them. So we'll start off with the very first question that we received, which was Nikila, who would like some information on the suburb of Brooklyn, if it's on your list there, please.
Yep, hang on a sec, should be. Just put the glasses back on.
Yep. And please keep your questions coming in the chat. What I'm also going to pop in the chat is some links to Buyer Solutions on social media that you can follow Janet as well as Buyer Solutions, and also the details of the next webinar that we're going to be hosting, which is all about the changes to the Residential Tenancies Act on the 25th of May. So there's the link to Eventbrite for you to register for that as well.
Thanks, Sue. Brooklyn's not listed, but Seddon is, and that has a median value of $1,063,000.
Wow. Yeah.
And that has gone slightly down in the last quarter. So that's some good news if you're wanting to buy over in that part of the world.
Great. Excellent. Thank you, Janet. And Jono and Kayla have asked if there is a broker that Buyer Solutions recommends.
Well, we've got multiple people that we're comfortable to refer to. I probably won't promote one over the other over the internet tonight, but feel free to reach out to me after this event and I'll introduce you to a couple of good people.
Excellent, thank you. And Rebecca has asked about the first home buyer grants right now. Now, I know that you did mention that earlier, but I think it's a good question to sort of revisit. So if you'd just like to quickly re-mention those first home buyer grants available at the moment.
Oh, the 25% discount in stamp duty if you're paying less than $1 million runs out on the 30th of June. And the stamp duty concessions for first home buyers, there's no word about when they'll be removed, but you have to buy a property worth less than $600,000 to pay zero stamp duty, or there's a descending scale after 600 down to up to about 750 when you're then paying full stamp duty.
Yeah, so Marie asked, is the stamp duty exemption available re-COVID, or exemption is this for any purchase under 600? So does it have to be a first home buyer that gets that stamp duty exemption, or can it be any buyer?
Sorry, say that again.
With that stamp duty exemption, do you have to be a first home buyer, or can it be any buyer for property under 600?
The 25% stamp duty discounts any buyer, but the zero stamp duty to 600 is a first home buyer.
Right, excellent. Now, Luke's asked, should or can a single first home buyer get an investment property instead, and can they still access the first home buyer grants at a later date?
Well, there's a bit of jargon called rent vest, and quite a few young buyers are buying what's really an investment property. They move into it and live in it for a fairly short period of time. I think it's 6 months in the first 12 months of buying the property. And then they might go and they find a tenant for that property after they move out and go and rent somewhere where they're happier to live. For example, we were talking to a young couple earlier wanting to buy in St Kilda. So you might buy an investment unit in Bayswater, live in it for 6 months. I think it's 6 months. Correct me if I'm wrong, and then rent that out and move back to St Kilda or Brunswick or wherever you would prefer to live for lifestyle reasons.
Yeah, and that would basically mean you're using up that first home buyer opportunity with that first purchase, doesn't it?
That does.
Yeah, cool, excellent. So Robin's asked, should first home buyers with over a $1 million budget, should they wait until after the 30th of June when the property market will cool down, or do it before the 30th of June whilst there's incentives are in place?
I think get going on it, but I hope I'm not going to be wrong.
Yeah, it's always hard to predict.
I think the emphasis with all our purchases is it's very hard to work out where to stop bidding, where is value. And that's quite often what our clients need us for in terms of positioning. Where do I stop bidding? What is a silly price? Am I going to have trouble with the bank valuation if I pay what, I have the capacity to pay, but you don't want to be overpaying for your real estate. No. So there's a fine line there between actually buying and not overpaying.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess it depends whether there's properties available that you like, in that price range too. That's not always the case. Nikila's asked a question. If I'm buying a townhouse off the plan between 750 and 800,000, do I have to pay stamp duty? And also, how is the stamp duty calculated? Is it on the price of the land or the price of the entire property?
Oh, I don't really know. I'll have to get back to you on that. Sorry.
That's all right. We'll message Nikila after the event and definitely get you those
I'll answer
details.
that question for you, Nicola.
Yeah, so thank you, Nicola. Great question. And as I said in the chat, there are the links to follow Janet and Buyer Solutions on social media. And we definitely encourage you to do that. Janine's asked, do you have data on Glen Iris and Baldwin? So if you can check back on the list.
Yep. Let's do this again. Glen Iris, 2,280,000, up 3.6% in the March quarter.
Yeah.
And Baldwin, was it Baldwin or North Baldwin?
Baldwin.
Baldwin, $2,581,500, up 12.2%.
Wow. Okay. So Baldwin's still performing very well. Now, Jono and Kayla have come back and said, how can or should you approach a landlord to sell their property? So I presume what you're saying there is you love where you live and you'd like to buy it. Is that right? Jono and
100%.
Kayla? Yeah. Okay, great.
If you're renting through an agent, that would be who I would approach and make your interest known to the real estate agent, who will then probably go and talk to the landlord. They'll be quite motivated to do a deal and maybe even encourage a non-motivated landlord to become motivated to sell. So the selling agent gets paid a commission by the seller at the time the transaction takes place. So they should be pretty motivated to help you. Or you can hire a buyer's agent to approach the owner of the property direct.
Excellent. Yes, I remember getting you in when my landlord wanted to buy the unit in front of my property, and he was able to bid, and it was very successful because nobody knew that the person who owned the back property was interested in buying the front property, and very, very clever sort of sneaky way to get into the market and not let the selling agent know what was going on.
Yeah, I think you've got to be very selective what information you share with the selling agent as well, Sue. Obviously, had they known that he already owned the back unit, they would have tried to make him pay a premium for the entire block of land and both properties. So I do recall that was many years ago now.
Yeah, it was, but it sold well, and yeah, he was very happy to get it. And he's actually got a number of other properties in the same area, as I've since found out.
Interesting.
So,
Sorry.
go on.
Just to follow on with the question, if the landlord is interested in selling, do you think the price would be higher because they'd be motivated to then purchase a replacement investment property, so they would want to cover their stamp duty and stuff?
I think that's a case-by-case basis, Kayla. Possibly. There are going to be some people getting out of the market. There's recently been changes to the Residential Tenancies Act. I think 133 changes came in on the 29th of March. So some property owners are going to divest or sell and get out of being an owner. They used to be called landlords. They're now called residential rental providers. The bar's really been lifted up by the state government in Victoria. There's a lot of compliance and mandatory disclosures and a lot more work going into being the owner of a property. So also we've had some clients who've either taken a package or retired due to COVID. They weren't working and they quite liked it. So and they don't benefit from negative gearing anymore in terms of lowering the tax that they pay. So they're also selling properties at the moment. So you might find you get a little bit more choice.
And the other thing is too, that the landlord doesn't have to pay the marketing and advertising fees as well if they sell directly to somebody living in the property. And you never know your luck. I did hear a story last year about a landlord who'd been renting a property to a woman for 25 years and he had no people to leave his money to, so he left the house to the tenant. How cool was that? So yeah, I think it pays to be nice to your landlord.
Yeah.
Never know how things could work out, and I think it's also very good to be a respectful tenant anyway. So yeah, it's worth asking the question. Eugenia has asked, what are some of the suburbs in Melbourne that are good options for rent vesting?
Oh, that really depends on your purchase budget. My advice would change if you had $450 to spend. My advice would be one particular area. If it was $600, another. Again, that'd be one for the 30-minute consultation.
Yeah. And Marie has asked.
But so can I just go on to say, if you are going to do the rent vest strategy, you have to take the mindset that you've got to buy the type of property that someone would want to rent from you, because otherwise you're not going to have any rent coming in down the track. So it's really important to think like a tenant.
Yeah, absolutely.
The future tenant, and buy what they want.
Yes, and properties with 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms can go very well with a lot of people, I hear. So,
and a balcony or a backyard.
Yeah,
after COVID.
And Marie has asked, how much is the first home buyer grant? Now, I don't think there's any home buyer grants left, are there?
No.
Oh, and is there a regional grant?
Oh, well, I'm not a regional expert. I believe there are tweaks to the regional buying, but that's not my area of expertise.
Yeah, no worries.
There's different limits and things, I believe.
Cool. So we've had a few people who keep dropping out thanks to awkward internet connections tonight. So apologies that you couldn't stay, but as I said, we're definitely recording this session. And as I mentioned before, the next session will be on the changes to the Residential Tenancies Act. So that will be a useful webinar both for people who rent as well as the rental service providers. Is that what they're called, or what was it their name, Janet?
Oh, sorry, I was just looking. Residential rental provider.
Residential rental provider.
So there's no such thing as a tenant anymore. It's a renter.
A renter.
The landlord's the RRP, and the lease is a rental agreement.
Well, there you go. So yeah, some new language to get used to. So I definitely encourage you to join us on the 25th of May. So what I might do now is we'll skip the chat and we'll just go open mic. And so if I see your mic turn on so that you're able to talk, we'd love to hear you ask general questions or share what you found most helpful from tonight's presentation. So who's going to be bold enough to unmute and ask a question? And I'm thinking I should put Eddie on the spot, seeing he's got that lovely REIV banner in the background. Would you like to tell us how you came to this event, Eddie, and your involvement with the REIV?
Oh, thank you, Sue. Well, Janet kindly invited me to attend. We work together on the Buyer Agents Committee at the REIV. So thanks for having me. I think it's a fantastic session, and you've imparted a lot of your knowledge, your wisdom. So some great takeaways here, I'm sure, for all the attendees.
Thanks, Eddie.
I wasn't sure if one of the questions was around how to calculate stamp duty. So I sent you a quick link to the SRO. There's a good tool there, and you can type in your various circumstance, so it can give you an accurate calculation of stamp duty.
All right, Eddie, if you'd like to pop that link in the chat, then that link will be available for the other people who are here tonight. So this is your last chance to ask questions. As I said, you can pop them in the chat.
Also, Sue, I have in our blog, we run a topic called Buyer Beware. And it's really a good thing to read as a first home buyer, because there's a few nightmare horror stories there, but at least it'll give you some ideas, the questions you need to ask and have answered before you sign a contract. And, you know, one of them was we were trying to buy a house actually over in Sunshine, and my client got all excited because it had a bungalow in the backyard and the bungalow was rented. So they were going to live in the house, rent the bungalow and have money coming in to pay off the mortgage. But when we did our checks with council, there was no permit for that bungalow to be constructed. And the council pointed out to us that it was, if they got a complaint from a neighbour or something, they might have to tear it down. So that would have posed awful problems for our client, because how do you ask a tenant to move out? I've got to tear the place down. The council's told me it's an illegal structure. So, you know, do your research. Things recently, like if the property has a pool, you have to register it with the council and you have to get a pool inspector in. And there's costs associated with that. So lots of pitfalls, as you said, the costly mistakes with property. My strongest message to first home buyers is slow down and get it right, because it's your one shot to set yourself up in the property market. It's the most important, one of the most important decisions, actions with consequences that you'll ever make in your life.
Yeah, I often use the quote that people will get 3 quotes to get some plumbing done, but they won't get 3 quotes to get, you know, purchase a property. It's kind of bizarre, isn't it? So now Janie has unmuted herself. So I hope you're brave and bold there, Janie, and you can ask a question of Janet. Are you unmuted? No? Okay, maybe not. Maybe it was just sort of an error on my screen here. That's all right. Does anybody else have any other questions? Because we've got another 20 minutes available. And Janine has given us a little comment. Thanks, Sue and Janet. Really helpful seminar. Would love to get your feedback on what has been most helpful from this seminar tonight. So if you can pop those feedbacks in the chat, we can then get a bit of an idea of, you know, the topics that are of most interest. Janet can write additional blogs on those topics, and definitely encourage you to subscribe to the newsletter as well on Janet's website. I'll just quickly show you her LinkedIn profile. Anybody who knows me in another area knows that I love LinkedIn, and so definitely invite you to connect with Janet. She posts on LinkedIn, and there's also the Buyer Solutions page on LinkedIn. Janet is also on Facebook, if that's your preferred medium, as well as Twitter, as well as Instagram. And I really like her Instagram post. When she's out and about, she'll take little snaps of what she's seen, and you can pretty much tell it's Janet photo if it's got green in it. Green is Janet's color, and everything has green. And I'll never forget when I was trying to help her update her website, she couldn't see any website design that looked good if it didn't have green in it. So it was it was a challenge.
Well, you've got to admit, it stands out, doesn't it?
It does.
So the other thing I'd just like to say, no one's asked a question on this, but we did talk briefly about different sales methodologies. I've had people sit in my office boardroom or on a Zoom or whatever and tell me, oh, I'd never bid at an auction. So you've just wiped out potentially 50 or 60% of the property market because you're intimidated by a sales process. I would argue hire a good professional to represent you and participate in these auctions, because even last weekend I was out and about. Some auctions were spectacularly successful, and I'm talking only A-grade properties that I went to, and others were not. So the market's patchy, and you've got to be like a dog with a bone. Get out there, because you just don't know when you're going to have a win.
Yep.
I bought a fabulous property in Fitzroy recently. I was quite shocked. There was a crowd of about 50 or 60 people and only 2 bidders, myself and one other. And the property was passed in to me, and we went inside to negotiate exclusively with the vendor and put the sold sticker up that night. So not even I know, after nearly 30 years in real estate, which ones I'm going to have a win at. You've just got to get into the contest. And also another really good tip is, at Buyer Solutions, we look for properties that are going to show one of 2 things: capital growth or yield. As a young buyer, you should be focusing on capital growth if you can, because it will build wealth and something called equity. So when you buy the property, you might have 20% equity and 80% borrowed. But then what we'd be liking to achieve is over the next 5 years, it becomes more like 50-50. So you actually own 50% of the property, because the property's doing the heavy lifting for you. It's going up in value as you minimise your debt and pay down your loan.
Absolutely.
So, you know, keep those goals in your mind. It's probably more important to keep those goals in your mind than, you know, when am I going to start this?
Well, the other thing, I was going to say the other thing is if you take the whole 30 years to pay off the loan, then you will pay double the purchase price. But if you pay it off in 15 years, you'll be a lot closer to the actual, you know, purchase price.
Yeah, look, as a real estate agent, it's not in my remit to give financial advice, but I can share clients' personal journeys, case studies, my own journey in real estate. I mean, my husband and I bought it was written up in the paper as the ugliest house in Kew. That was our first home, and we were really proud of it. And we got all our mates around one afternoon and knocked a really ugly garage that had been constructed in front of the beautiful Edwardian facade down, and changed windows, polished boards, painted, replaced a few things, upgraded the bathroom. It was really good fun. If you're that sort of person, I am that sort of person. So, you know, there's lots of ways we can build equity and make money in real estate.
Yeah. Now, there's another story I'd like to share from you, but John has unmuted his microphone. So please, John, tell us your question.
I have. Yeah, thanks very much, Sue and Janet. My question's sort of more around the outlook for the market in Melbourne over the next 12 months. I mean, I was one of those people that last year saw, you know, the deferred home loans and looking at the end of JobKeeper thinking, surely this must mean that there's going to be mortgage stress out there. Surely this means that the property market's going to cool off. But obviously at the moment, it seems like the March quarter was one of the strongest growth that we've had for a long time. And, you know, median house prices over $1 million. So do we see, like, just in terms, I know you can't predict the future, but from where you're sitting, do you see the market continuing to climb for the rest of this year because of the low interest rate environment? Or do you think that there will maybe be some cooling off of the market after this sort of pent up demand for property has ended?
Yeah, look, I think it'll calm down a little bit in the next 3 months. As to 12 months' time, I mean, this has been an extraordinary period where, you know, the real estate market was literally shut unless you were prepared to buy something from a video for months last year. So, and we were working from home. So I think there's enough demand. A bigger concern for me is, why don't you take the view that you're buying and maybe in your target suburb you have less competition because there's no migration at the moment. One of the things underpinning the general market growth in Melbourne is strong migration. So right now there is no competition in that regard. It's, you know, pretty light on.
Yeah.
Good question, John. Thank you.
Yeah,
Did you have
John.
Any follow-up to that? Was there any other question you'd like to ask in response to the answer?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Now, Luke's asked a further question on buyer advocate prices and commission versus a fixed fee. So do you have any thoughts on that topic?
All buyers agents have different approaches to how they charge. And we're not meant to collude on fees with other agents, but at Buyer Solutions, we're happy to work either on a percentage basis or a fixed fee. Depends on each client and their preferences, and also what we can afford to offer our professional services for. So if you budget between sort of roughly 1 to 2% of your purchase budget, obviously plus GST, you should be able to find a highly qualified, fully accredited buyer's agent to assist you. And we're all different. We all have different sectors that we work for and don't work for. Buyer Solutions, we're happy to work for home buyers or investors. I even do development work, buy land for development and things like that. And we even do a bit of commercial. So it's never boring.
No, and you get a very personalised service as well. Alana has made a comment. A friend said at the moment the market is crazy and loans are frozen at 2 or 3% interest, but this will stop in a few years and people will then have to pay 5% and lots will realise they can't afford it. Therefore, is it best to wait till a few years till things cool down or buy now as rent money is dead money?
Oh, Alana, that's a $2 million question. I've had personal friends sit their money in the bank, rent, and live to regret it. I've had clients do that as well. I think with real estate, you've got to take a longer term view and, buckle up and get into the market at some point. Going back to my point, don't overpay for the property in the first place, though.
Yeah, so long as you buy a good quality property with that capital growth, or what was the other one you mentioned? Capital growth and
well, mostly capital growth,
yeah, yeah,
or upside potential to do work to it and add value that way.
Add value. Excellent. Now, I remember going back to the comment about auctions and people being scared about it. I remember you telling me the story about a property that you went to the auction and it was passed in, and everybody assumed the property wasn't going to be sold, but then you negotiated after the auction and managed to acquire the property. So is that something that the average punter on their own could do, or do you think that does require specialist knowledge?
I think it's one of the most intimidating experiences to be in, and possibly you would like someone there to support you, because it's you one-on-one with a team of selling agents. And Melbourne agents, they're some of the best in the world. They're highly skilled negotiators, and they're there to try to get the highest price for the property. They're not working for you. You need to keep that front of mind. Selling agent, particularly a good one, is working for the seller.
Yeah. And the other interesting story I heard very recently was a person who was up against two other bidders, but they developed a rapport with a real estate agent, saying they had a Hungarian background and, how much they loved the property, and, really butted up the real estate agent. And it turns out that they were one of three offers of an identical amount. And so obviously the real estate agent was more inclined to recommend them rather than, the other two bidders. Have you had that experience?
I've definitely had situations where the vendor has favoured my client because my client was going to live in the property in comparison to selling it to someone to knock the house down, for example. I've even bought property on a lower price. So a vendor picks who they want to sell to and why they want to sell. And it's not just price, Sue, it's also terms. Keep in mind things like settlement period and how much deposit you're going to pay. Because if it's a private sale scenario, the agent or the vendor will consider all the options put before them and then select one.
Yeah, no, very good point. And I think the other thing is, when a real estate agent is dealing with a buyer's agent, they know that it's a genuine buyer. There's not going to be flaking at the last minute and awkward negotiations and changes to settlement terms and all sorts of other things that could potentially go wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. All right, this is your last chance to ask any questions. And don't forget, you can email Janet directly. So if you've got a question you would like to ask Janet, but you don't want to sort of announce it publicly, I'll just put Janet's email address in the chat there for you. As I said, this session is being recorded. We'll be putting this up on YouTube so that if you think anybody else would be interested in this content, they can listen to it as well or watch it. Also, I'd like to acknowledge all of you who've stayed right till the end. It takes a certain level of dedication and commitment to listen to the full presentation and not just get, the quick wins at the beginning. So thank you to those who've listened all the way through. So last chance to unmute your microphone and ask any questions or pop something in the chat. Otherwise, we're just about ready to say goodnight. No, nothing else. All right. Well, Janet, do you have any final closing comments?
No, I'd just like to thank everyone for making the effort. It's a really big deal buying your first home, and going out there and finding out as much information as you can is part of the journey. So thanks for making time on your Tuesday evening, and don't hesitate to reach out at the appropriate time. I was invited to present at a first home buyers evening many years ago, about 20 years ago now, Sue, and I was just really excited by working with dynamic, engaged keen people with a goal. So always happy to help.
Yeah, and Mark said awesome information, Janet. So well
thank
done.
you.
Yeah. All right, on that happy note, we'll all say goodbye for now.
See ya. Bye, Eddie.
Bye. Well done. See.